Alright, today we're just going to be talking about the Chinese language, actually. So you can just kind of enjoy this gameplay in the background, but I'm just going to be talking about Chinese, different aspects of it. I'm just talking about it. So, off the bat, Chinese is the very broad word for the language and the race. Chinese refers to both the race and the spoken language, even though you can't actually speak Chinese. You speak a dialect of Chinese. So, the most common dialects are Mandarin and Cantonese. Those are the two most common ones. And even then, it's kind of tough to get an idea of, because Cantonese has about 300 different dialects. So you can speak Cantonese, but then you can speak one of the three most common dialects of Cantonese. There's a bunch of other dialects. There's of Chinese. There's Taiwanese, there's Fujianese, there's Shanghaiese. There's a bunch. And in the end, they're all put under Chinese. They're all labeled under that one category. So I know Mandarin Chinese, so that's what we're going to focus on today. In Mandarin Chinese and most Chinese dialects, there are two major parts. One is speaking and listening, and the other is reading and writing. And they are very much separate from each other. So first we'll talk about listening and speaking. This is objectively the easier part of Mandarin Chinese because there's less memorization. There's still a significant amount of memorization involved, but just less overall. For the most part, you just have to know how to say a word, know what you're saying, and then you have to know how a word sounds and what it means. And those are the only two parts that you need in order to speak and listen and understand Mandarin. So if you know the word for me, and you can say it, and you know how it sounds, then when somebody else says that same word, you can understand it. You know what they're saying. And vice versa. If you know what a word sounds like and means, then whenever somebody says it, you know what they're saying. That's just kind of how it works. Very straightforward. You have to memorize the words, you have to be able to speak it, and you have to know what you're saying. Otherwise, it's like saying a word in English that you don't know what it means, but you know how to say it. Like it doesn't hold a lot of meaning to you, and you could end up saying something that doesn't make any sense. So if you were to say the word for me, but you didn't actually know that's what it meant, then depending on the conversation or the phrase, you could appear ignorant. However, it's very easy to just memorize a bunch of different words and figure out new terms and know what it means and then understand it. You can, because once you know how to say it, for the most part, you know how it sounds as well. And thus, that leads you to being able to speak it and hear it, understand it. And the important part for that is what separates just knowing it and being able to speak it is understanding what it means. Right? If you know if you know how to say anthropomorphic, you can say it all you want. But if you don't know what it means, then you can say it, but then if you say it to somebody who also doesn't know what it means, they'll be like, what does that word mean? And then you look, it's awkward because you have absolutely no idea what it means and you just said it. So it's the same deal with Chinese. If you don't know what a word is, but you hear it, there's absolutely no shame in figuring out what it means, because once you know what it means and how it sounds, you can use it in any sentence. So that's the speaking and understanding part. It's pretty straightforward. The only thing is that it is you just have to get started is very difficult. Okay, so that's speaking and listening. Now, for reading and writing, it is a very different world from speaking and listening, because each character, and I'll put some up on the screen. There are simple characters, there are difficult characters, there are characters that look very similar to each other, and there are some characters that can be pronounced differently depending on the context. So you could say, for example, this character, Xing or Hang, it's the same character used for both of those pronunciations, but the situation is different for when you say Xing or Hang. Same with Le or Liao. It's the same thing. Depending on the context, you would read it differently. And it's very easy when you're just speaking, because you don't have to think about the characters. But as soon as you learn the characters, as soon as you're reading, you have to pay attention to at least 2 characters ahead in order to know for only some characters. Not every character is this way, but for some characters like these 2, there's a couple more that I can't think of right now. If I think of them, I'll put them up. But you need to look a couple characters ahead in order to, or be paying attention to where you're reading in order to know how to say this character. But for the first character, Xing or Hang, it really just depends on what character it's with. With reading and writing, it's the same as speaking and listening. You can't really learn how to do one without the other. Like you can't, if you learn how to say a sentence, you kind of in turn learn how to hear it, like how to understand it. When you hear that sentence, after you learn how to speak a sentence, when you hear it, it connects. Like, oh, I know what that, I know how to say that sentence, therefore I know what they're saying. And it's kind of the same with reading and writing. If you know how to read a character, then it takes effort, but you should also know how to write that character. And vice versa. If you know how to write a character, you should be able to know how to read it. It is possible to be able to read Chinese or Mandarin Chinese characters without being able to write it, but for the most part you kind of have to go out of your way in order to achieve that. It's much easier, in my opinion, to learn it together, learn how to read and write at the same time. The issue is that there are a couple different ways, not an issue. There are a couple different ways to go about learning Mandarin. Number one is to learn how to speak and understand. First, that is the first thing that you do. Very easy. It's a lot quicker, and there's less effort. There's still a significant amount of effort, but it's not as difficult. However, if you want to improve, like if you wanted to learn characters later on, if you wanted to learn how to read and write, then it becomes difficult because you now have to connect every single word that you know to its character. So you have to rememorize. Rememorize is a rough term. Rememorize everything. You already know how to say the phrase. It's akin to learning how to speak English before you learn the alphabet. So you know how to say hello, how are you? But then when you learn the alphabet, you now have to connect those words that you know how to speak to the letters that you write. Learning hello, and that written word means the same thing as spoken hello. So that's it's the same deal with Mandarin. When you learn the writing, the characters after you have a set education in the speaking, it gives you a basis, but then you still have to relearn a lot. So that's option 1. That's like the first way that you can go about learning. Option 2 is to learn everything at once. Learn the characters and the speaking at the same time. This is definitely more difficult. It's going to take a lot more time. It's going to be harder. But in the long run, it's easier. It kind of sounds weird, but if you put in more effort now at the beginning, you will save time later on. It won't be, like, there are certainly some situations where you don't need to be able to read. Like if you're just visiting China or Taiwan and you're just visiting there, sightseeing or whatever, you don't need to read. But if you're going to go to Taiwan and live there, or go somewhere in Dongbei, China, you're gonna need to read characters. You have to, because otherwise you're not gonna be able to go anywhere. If you're only there for like a week or two, then there are some parts in China and Taiwan that have a significant amount of English translations or guides for cheap. But if you're not going to those places, then you'd need to speak Mandarin or be able to read characters in order to get along by yourself. Like if you didn't know, well, for one, if you were going to a foreign land and you didn't know the language, it's not a great start. I know that a bunch of people do that. Like people will go to France or whatever and visit. I don't know, France just came to my mind first. And they don't speak a lick of French, but Paris is cool, and so that's where they're visiting. Like, I don't know. So, in learning, if you learn everything at once, writing and reading and speaking and understanding all at once, it's going to be a lot more effort. You're going to have to memorize a lot more things, but it's easier to make the connections. It will be slower, but you'll make a connection for everything stronger. So when you learn hello, how are you, you don't learn just how to say it, but how to read it and how to write it as well. So in the end, you learn more faster instead of learning just how to speak and read, or speak and understand, and then later on learning how to read and write. So there isn't very many like study tips that I can provide. Chinese is a very interesting language in that each of its characters is unique. It has there was a cultural revolution / reform a while ago in which they consolidated a lot of characters. With the modern characters that we have, there are two types of writing. One is simplified and one is traditional. I'm going to put up a couple of characters that have these very different look to them between their simplified and traditional. There are some that look very different, like the word for speak is very different, or very similar. There's like hardly any change. But then there's some, like the word for listen or the word for allow, that has changed drastically. And along with that, there were a lot of words that were kind of removed from use. So they just aren't used as much anymore, and thus their meanings have been kind of slapped onto other characters. It's not like an awkward change, it's just for the character, because originally each meaning and it was a lot like Spanish, where they have like a different verb word for different situations. I cannot for the life of me remember how to say that. but you would say a verb differently depending on the situation. It was the same thing in Chinese. They had a bunch of different characters for a bunch of different situations. And during the Cultural Reform, they readjusted the writing language into simplified Chinese to make it easier to learn how to write. And then they also grouped a bunch of characters together into one to make it easier to speak. So you just had to learn less characters. And there was some good and some bad. A good thing is that it's a lot easier to learn. It's a lot easier to understand. Well, maybe not easier to understand. The downside is that unless you know the context, unless you know everything of what somebody is saying, then it will be harder to understand. Like if you say a word, you have to know also what the other words mean in order to understand the context of the whole sentence. And that's just kind of how it is. You can't know half of a sentence and understand the whole meaning. You have to be able to speak that sentence. You have to know what they're saying in order to know what they're saying. So overall, I wouldn't recommend, me personally, I don't recommend doing one or the other. I'd say do whatever works for you, do whatever you want to do if you want to learn Chinese. I really like Chinese, and that's what I'm passionate about. I really like the language, and that's why I'm kind of doing this video. One last thing is each character, as I was saying before, each character is unique. Each character has meaning behind it. Each component and each component of it holds some form of meaning, and it can also help you understand what the character means and how to read it without actually knowing it prior. So there's what's called a radical, which is the little part of the character next to it, or after it, or above it, wherever. But the radical is the thing that modifies the meaning. So there's the base character. The character is made up of components, and then when you add a radical onto it, it modifies that meaning. So that's a good way. That's one of the few ways that you can kind of look at a character and get a general idea of what it means or how to read it without knowing it beforehand. Otherwise, you have to know what the character looks like and how to read it in order to read it and write it. That's kind of all from me today. I just thought I would share this, what I love about Chinese, about Mandarin, and share some tips and some ideas on it. Hope you enjoyed. If you have any ideas, leave them down below. Bye.